Okay, I'm going to get started. So hi, everyone. My name is Seema Alexander, and I'm coming to you live on day 2 from the WeWork, our co-working sponsor and partner in downtown Washington, D.C. I'm the founder and chief strategy officer for Disruptive.CEO. It's a strategic advisory firm focused on supporting visionary founders and companies to scale and grow. And I have the honor and privilege this year to have curated the growth track for the DC Startup Week. In the growth track, we have 16 panels and workshops on marketing, on branding, on sales strategy like this one, people strategy, and so much more. At the end of this panel, I'm going to share about 4 other sessions that are happening today specifically for this growth track so that you know exactly where to go right after this. For those of you who are new to DC Startup Week, this is an ongoing, amazing, free resource for early stage and growth stage entrepreneurs in the DMV region. It happens every September for 5 days straight. Normally we have close to 100 panels, if not more. And this year, we have incredible experts speaking on 5 different tracks: the founder track, the growth track, developer track, creative economy, and culture track. We would not be able to do this at all without our sponsors and specifically our title sponsors. So I want to give a quick shout out to Next, Insperity, Wiz, and Technology Rivers. Thank you so much for being a partner with us and providing us all we need to do this event free for so many entrepreneurs in our region. So now I am so excited to actually talk about this session. We are bringing back Tom Snyder. He's the founder and managing partner of Funnel Clarity. He's a seasoned entrepreneur with several exits around his belt. And in the process, he fell in love with the art and science of sales. So he now runs a company called Funnel Clarity, which is a sales training and coaching firm for sales teams and companies around the country. Today, our topic is how to build a strong sales team in a growth company. I would say it's one of the most critical conversations when you're in a growth-focused stage. Really understanding the connectivity between product market fit, between marketing strategies and sales efforts together, right? I think you have no idea, like the panelists that we have together and how much golden nuggets they're going to bring to you. I'm really excited to bring Karen DelVecchio. She's the Executive Vice President of Sales and Customer Success for EVERFI. Caroline Turner, the Vice President and Head of Enterprise Sales for General Assembly. James Whitman, he's the founder and Managing Director of Growth Guidepost and previously headed Enterprise Sales for Catalyte. And all of them were also part of the strong growth team at Corporate Executive Board. So it's really fun when we have a panel that really gets to know each other. So you're gonna go deep and quickly and have some amazing stories to share. One quick logistics thing: when you do have questions, please put them in all caps in the Q&A below. And Tom will, at the appropriate time, start reaching out and ask those or get those questions answered for you as much as he can. So with that, please welcome Tom Snyder to our DC Startup Week stage. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. This is a lot of fun. I hope everybody is really buttoned their seatbelt because the panelists here have a wealth of experience. We're really, really fortunate to have the 3 of them here. I'm going to pull up my screen very quickly. I have a couple of slides. It's going to be important for just making sure we can keep everybody on the same page here. Okie dokie, there we go. Hopefully you can see that slide. You will see all of our handsome pictures. You'll see to the far right, I'm by far, I look like everyone's grandfather, but other than that, we're in good shape. So here's what we're gonna do. I want you to understand how we're going to organize this. The time disappears so quickly in these things.
Hey, Tom, it's a blank screen, but we can't see your slide.
Okay, hang on, thank you.
You might need to share your whole screen.
Yeah, I'm trying, hold on. It says I'm sharing.
Now we can see it.
Thank God, okay.
The slide says expectations.
All right, I was just about to run away. Anyway, okay, so we're gonna have polling questions. We've got 2 of them, and we'll get the polling question posted on your screen. You merely need to type whichever letter corresponds to the answer you'd like to highlight, send that off, and Tyler will assemble those. We're also going to have some stimulus questions for our distinguished panels, but I suspect once we get going, there's going to be a great deal of information. So I'm encouraging you to post any question you may have. And please do use that chat feature so that we can make this as interactive as possible. So let me start with my first polling question. What success have you had with regard to finding the right sales personnel? This tends to be an unanticipated struggle in companies that are startups or emerging growth. And we've got 5 answers there. We've nailed it. It's been hit and miss. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. We struggled in the beginning, but we're getting on the road to understanding it. We're lost, or we're not even hiring salespeople yet. And if you could just enter the letter corresponding to that answer you want to highlight and send that to Tyler in the chat box, we will check back with that in just a moment and see where we are. But I suspect all 5 of those answers will be represented because I think it really is one of those challenges. So for the panel, we thought we might begin with some context around this. In thinking about a young organization's growth aspirations, one thing that emerging growth and startup companies find challenging is hiring the right kind of salespeople. Perhaps each of you could share your experience in terms of how to meet this challenge. Can you give anyone insight into finding the right people and identifying the important factors to ensure their success once they're on board? And maybe I can start with you, Kara, and I'll go around the horn, but can I start with you, please?
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Tom. I think the key to me here is that the salespeople that you're going to hire really have to be matched to your sales process. So let me start with what I think are maybe some of the pitfalls or mistakes that people make as they start to hire a sales team. And I see there are lots of E's where founders are still doing the selling. So let's talk about once the founder or co-founders decide to start hiring, what you're looking for. I think the pitfall that I see most often is that people are hiring for the resume or for the industry experience. So let me talk a little bit about each of those. The resume is you've been somewhere that we all recognize. So the Googles or the Bloombergs or, you know, an organization that we think is a solid sales organization or just a very reputable organization. Or you're hiring for industry expertise. So let's say you're selling to financial services, you want somebody who has been in the banking industry or at a bank. And I think the mistake that can sometimes happen in that is that that isn't the best person for the sales process that you have. So you may be inclined to go that way when instead I would say you really want to look at the skills and behaviors and attributes that those candidates have. I don't know if any of you listen to John Barrow's Make It Happen Mondays, but he tries to answer this question, Tom, that you're putting into the chat. You can teach a lot of structure and process, how to connect with the specific customers in the right way, but you really can't teach some of the basics around intellectual curiosity, grit, the attitude that people bring to work. So I think it's a really important balance to try to think about what you really need and what you expect from salespeople.
Yeah, Kara, I love that. I love that idea of let's not hire for the resume, let's really hire for traits, behaviors, and skills. I love that. It's a really important point in my entrepreneurial experience anyway. Caroline, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. You know, when I think about, when I've watched different stages of organizations, I've seen companies in the early stage struggle when they bring on folks who are looking for the playbook. And so I think really figuring out early on, does somebody know that they're gonna come in there and really figure out the product market fit? If that's not done yet, are they gonna be the person who's really comfortable really tap dancing in the moment and coming back to product and saying, it's going this direction. It's not going this direction. Or the person who says, give me the playbook. I'm a hunter and I'm just going to go out there and, you know, like a honey badger, I'm going to get all those deals in for you. And so that's kind of, again, ask yourself, you know, are we at 100% wallet retention rate? Do we have an NPS higher than 30? Can we really scale this thing with sellers who know how to do that? Do I really have to hire that more consultative seller who's super comfortable in the ambiguity and really thrives in it?
Wow. What a great point. I think, you know, when it comes down to that idea of matching the idea that Kara brought up, not just to your sales process, but also to this idea of what environment are they coming into? Is your market mature enough that there is a playbook, there is a process, or are you laying tracks in front of the engine? That's a really different kind of person in each of those cases. James?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think this is a great theme, and it's sort of assessing where you are in that journey. And, you know, on this call, we've got a lot of E's, early folks who should be thinking about building that sales process. I think the danger is if you start hiring salespeople and you are expecting them to go out and start deliver results and be that honey badger, like Caroline's talking about, if you haven't built a sales process, you're going to be really disappointed and your investments are going to be wasted. I think there are very few individuals, we got a couple on the phone now, who can do that product market fit in the marketplace, but it's an expensive undertaking and it's kind of perilous. So, you know, I think what a founder needs to be doing early on is building a repeatable sales process that they can implement, they can go through, and then hand that to professionals who can replicate it. But it's really like knowing where you are in that journey and then building to process. You know, you can't just look for absolute superstars when you go to the market to hire. You have to think about average, above average talent and put the right tools in their hands to make them successful.
Yeah, that's great, James. I think in our practice, the one thing that seems to be missing from the tabula rasa of a startup is a sales process. That sales process generally in emerging companies tends to look like, we'll just get a demo and then we'll sell it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's all good for doing demos. I'm not sure I would call that a sales process, but you know, I wonder from the three of you, if you think about that word sales process and somebody on the phone was sitting there thinking, well, what do they really mean by that label? What the heck is a sales process? How do I know it when I see it? Maybe James, I could start with you on this one. What are we really talking about when we say that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's some really core building blocks and across everything across my sales career is that sales is not rocket science. It's a formula, it's a process, it's a set of activities. I think Caroline said, you know, there are people you can hire who have the right aptitudes and the right sort of biases towards the job. But I like to think that it's actually a much broader activity that many more people can do and CEOs should be doing from the start and need to be. But the elements are, you know, do you really have a tightly defined buyer persona? Like, what does a good buyer look like? What are the right questions to ask that individual? We talk about discovery questions and the discovery framework. But it's really, you know, what are the questions you're going to ask in a sales call? And what sort of answers and objections do you receive on a regular basis? This is all activity a founder, CEO can be doing in their calls. Engaging clients, asking good questions, really learning in every sales meeting, starting to build a pattern and pattern recognition of different buyers and different segments react. And then it's starting to put together the tools. So founder should have some sort of fundamental tracking system, at least a spreadsheet, ideally a CRM, where they're holding themselves accountable to the pipeline, thinking about what are the natural stages. And there's certainly lots and lots of sales methodologies and approaches and techniques, but a lot of it is just really basic. You know, what does a good first interaction look like? That can be relatively subjective, and then putting down some bullets around that of, you know, these 2 or 3 things happened in the call, and these 2 or 3 things did not happen. And just sort of diligently working through that process, being able to say, yep, I moved this many people to the second phase. We've got the demo with these 2 people. The outcome of the demo was this or that. And just really having a view of what that works. And certainly not hiring a salesperson until you've gone through the entire arc. finding the client, convincing the client to close in the client, and probably ideally renewing them at some point in time. Then once you've done that, you have a process. It can be refined. It's going to, professionals touch that, and it's going to get better. But knowing how it works and proving that it can work from end to end.
That's great, James. One of the messages I'm kind of hearing between the lines is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Assembling the elements and then looking at this as an ongoing improvement exercise as opposed to waiting until you've got it perfectly. Caroline, on that theme, I wonder, have you ever seen or would you advise a founder, CEO who's struggling with this idea of process as James described it, interviewing customers they have landed, or is that too risky of a process?
Oh, I think that's wonderful. I mean, to understand the buying process, I think is the next step in refining your actual sales process. Once, I'm going to go back to CB research, right? Once you kind of can map your buying process to what goes on internally, you can then map the collateral, the support that buyer needs along the way. So maybe at some point, most likely that buyer needs to go to their CFO or to some other higher decision maker. What kind of tools does that person need to make that business case? So understanding what the buyer goes through is really helpful. You may also understand, when they were evaluating you, who else are they looking at? So all of a sudden you start to get a better map of the competitors and what was interesting to them about somebody else. I also think folks really value when they say yes to buy, if you ask them why. It rearticulates in their own mind the value they see in you. And you may also understand a little differently why they bought you and what you should be kind of pushing on in your next prospect call, because sometimes you think they're buying for one thing, but you don't realize something that maybe really popped for them that you didn't hear in the conversation, but you're asking them to articulate it.
Oh, that's great. So I love this idea of we structure our sales process and then we examine how our buyers are making these decisions so we can align those two. I would really maintain, Kara, that that's what a real sales funnel or sales pipeline looks like. Absent one of those two things, you sort of have a workflow or a decision flow. Would you think that that's important to have both the buying decision milestones aligned with your internal sales process? Have you seen that done well before?
Yeah, and I mean, I think Caroline's point is so important about this journey that the buyer is taking with you and with the sales process, right? So I actually like to go pretty deep into this. What is the customer feeling along the way? What are they thinking? Are they nervous about making a decision to buy, depending especially on the price point, and even thinking about this environment right now, there's a lot of risk to making a bad decision. So how are you thinking about mitigating those risks or mitigating those feelings for your customer? How are you giving them assurance that when they buy from you, they are going to get exactly what they expect? I love Caroline's idea of saying, why are you buying again, right? To really make sure that you understand how they expect to get the ROI from your product. And then in particular, as you're thinking about making them successful with your product, are you continuously thinking about that in that success journey, right? So there is a lot of matching along the way, but I think if you really center on the customer and on that journey, and then exactly as Caroline said, align your sales process to that and the feelings along the way of your customer plus your seller, right? Now I'm getting really anxious because I want to close this deal. How's my customer feeling? And always putting yourself in that mindset, I think you can create a really successful process.
Well, that sounds great. I think, what we have seen is that the extent to which you can match the behaviors and actions of a salesperson to the customer's next significant interim decision is really the ability to elegantly use this as both a forecasting tool, a strategic tool, a tracking tool, and all those other wonderful things. Well, that's really terrific. Let me turn to my colleague, Tyler. Tyler, tell us a little bit about what happened in that poll.
Sure. So the results were overwhelmingly selection E, which is they're not hiring salespeople yet, and the founders do all of the selling. that was the overwhelming majority of the results. There was also some B's and C's, which was, it's been hit or miss, as well as at first it was a struggle, but it's getting better.
Yeah. Hey, Tyler, any A's in there? Anyone totally figured this out? I want to meet them. If you have.
I do not think we've received any A's.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I think, this speaks to exactly what the panelists have been talking about. If you're a founder, you're doing the selling, you don't yet have salespeople, in addition to the pressure on you to generate revenue, it is really, really productive, from what the three panelists have told us, to step back and be thinking about both the process you are going through and the process your customer is going through. And use that to assemble, let's call it version 1.0 of your sales pipeline, so that you have a starting point. And if you bring in professionals, they're able to not start de novo, but to have some data to generate with. Very well done. Any other comments on this question from any of my three colleagues?
Yeah, I would suggest, sorry, go ahead, Kara.
No, go ahead. I was going to just comment on the chat, James. So I just wanted to address one quick thing in the chat that I think is really important.
Okay, let me just real quickly say, I think Tom's point about in terms of asking, Kara's point about asking, and Tom's point about aligning your funnel with important customer decisions is really it. Knowing and asking and having it be validated by the client is really central. And a lot of the work at CEB and Challenger really backs that up. Salespeople, CEOs, we get caught up in emotions, and we want to see things, and sometimes it's very positive, and sometimes very negative. But knowing and having an objective measure in the client telling you where they are, how they're feeling about the process, having some of those questions answered really is a key piece. Over to you, Kara.
I was just going to comment a little bit, because people are asking, how long until you can expect results from a salesperson? And I think this is the key question that you get from a CEO, right? I just spent a long time hiring potentially one or two first salespeople. I want to know that they're going to sell and sell right away. And I think the one thing that I would just caution, and by the way, there is no one more goal-oriented than a sales leader. I think anybody who's worked with the three of us knows how incredibly goal-oriented we are. So I love an outcome. But I think you also really need to think about this process that we're talking about, right? And making sure that you're measuring some of the inputs as well. So how many times are we connecting with customers? How many times, to James's point and Caroline's point before, are we moving through the sales process? What are customers saying when they come out of the sales process? What are customers saying when they're excited about us, right? So that we can really start to measure and understand that prospect feedback, and really start to then hone the sales process, rather than just say, salesperson, welcome, I'm the founder, 6 months or you're out, right? You've got to make sure that you're measuring some things along the way as well, to really create a successful, I think, sales organization.
I love that comment. Let me ask the three of you, and Caroline, I'll start with you on this one. So often when an entrepreneur has founded their dream, here they've launched a company, and perhaps it's even beyond the launch. Perhaps we're at the point where we're in emerging growth. We prove the concept works. We actually have customers. The relentless pressure for revenue is different in an entrepreneurial world than it is in a major corporate world. Every company wants growth. Every company wants revenue. But I wonder if the pressures that fall, and maybe you don't agree, and that's fine, is the pressure any different on the salespeople you hire in a startup or emerging growth company than those that are in large corporate mature industries? And if so, how do you deal with that in terms of not scaring them to death, but getting good performance?
I mean, I've yet to work in a sales organization where there wasn't pressure, but I think the difference is it's the tools, right? And the ambiguity that a salesperson has to live in an early stage company. And that pressure is different, right? And it's a different type of stress than I get the playbook. maybe the KPIs are higher, right? Because this has been a well-trodden path. So I think it goes back to our original thing of what is this person looking for? What are they comfortable in? Are they comfortable in the ambiguity? And there could be the big payoff, but they're going to have to navigate so much of this on their own without maybe a developed B2B marketing, without a developed sales ops team. And so in that way, that right profile is the person who embraces that and can wear many hats, right? Can make their own decks, can do the negotiations, can really take legal much further than they need to, whereas someone coming from a more established background, would need those resources much earlier on.
Wow, I don't think that could be overstated. The fact that you need somebody who can be on their own support. You can't in an emerging company afford a whole staff of folks in the categories Caroline just listed out. So can they do their own decks? Big one. Seems easy? Not. Can they do their own negotiations? Seems easy? Not. And that generally is also the personality, character traits, skills, behaviors of somebody who actually likes being in an ambiguous environment. And James, I wonder if you could comment on that about, we tend to reach out and hire people who've worked with major corporations. They come into this world and we've got a world of ambiguity, and now what? How do we prevent that?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. And I think for the early company, even the kind of mid-stage growth company, haven't gotten to that role specialization that Caroline was talking about. That you have to wear all those hats. So I think one is making sure that the rep understands that and that they really take that on board and you really talk through the specifics. I think the other part of that is, and I think you talked about this, Tom, the urgency to get goals hit does not change at stage. I think, quite frankly, large public companies, it's even more intense. Every 90 days, there are powerful people who are evaluating your performance. And I think the demands of a public company are probably greater than a startup that's working quietly. And what's different is indeed the role specialization and the tools. I think it's really important for the early company not to put kind of this existential pressure on a sales team. Like, if you don't close this deal, this company will fail. It's not a good mindset for a salesperson to be operating in. They have to be thinking about the future and the long term and success and positivity, and that they're building towards something. I mean, intensity and goal orientation is in the DNA of salespeople and sales leaders. You have to, I'm going to say assume that, but find and recruit for that. And then give a supportive environment that is leading to success and is working through this hard process.
Yeah. I can see that. I think, you comment on something very interesting. In the world of those companies where the Wall Street Journal publishes every day their report card, what might not survive is the sales leader or the CEO. If you're talking about the startup company or an emerging mid-stage company that isn't public and is quietly trying to make their way, it may be the whole company at risk, but you don't want to convey that pressure. I think is really important. You want to stay with a hopeful vision of a very productive future as an encouragement. I don't know that many salespeople are really motivated by the chase you with a stick kind of approach. Kara, any last comments on that?
I think there's a lot of comments in the chat about compensation too, and I'm not sure we want to go into that bucket because it's a very complicated
different panel
bucket, I think, and also very important to think about the environment and sort of where you are from a staging perspective and what you really need. But it's just interesting to think about some of these questions around how can I get people to deliver, how can I get people to come work for me if I can't really afford, the right talent. And I would just say, this is where the upside comes in. I think James talked a lot about just this DNA that really great salespeople have around getting to goal and goal orientation. So I think you want to set really reasonable expectations, especially if you're brand new and especially if this is salesperson number 1 or 2, right? And again, I would just reiterate the point of the panelists that there's a lot of things along the way besides the outcome that you want to be measuring, but then really thinking about as people start to accelerate, as people are giving great customer feedback and really helping the sort of marketing engine and the way that you're talking to customers get better and better, you want to give your salespeople a lot of upside. We used to call it a hockey stick, sort of after goal to really accelerate that. And that's a great way, I think, to provide not a stick, to Tom's point, but really a carrot around keep going, keep connecting with prospects, keep moving the dial, keep moving maybe the price point up, whatever it is, right? But you want to give somebody a really great reward as they continue to exceed those expectations.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. And I think we'd all agree this compensation question is, it's always funny. I always say I've never met a salesperson who's happy with their compensation plan until you go to change it. Anyway, so let's move to, if we could, our next polling question. And this one may take a bit of thought, but please just react as to first reaction in the chat box. Which of the following best describes the relationship between your CEO and your sales leader or sales team? Now, one of them is CEO is directly involved in working with salespeople on most deals. B, the CEO sets expectations and allows the leaders to execute. C, the CEO serves as primary coach. D, the sales leaders sit at the strategic table. Or we don't have sales leadership, but there's pressure to grow faster. And I'm just curious. Now, this is an interesting thing that I think most of us on this panel would agree is not immediately obvious to an entrepreneur or the CEO of a emerging company. Those people tend to have a vision and a single-mindedness about motivation and driving forward. And I think we would say that too many times there's an assumption on the part of the CEO that everybody gets it. And I just think it's something worth talking about. It may be a bit more subtle, but maybe this time, James, I can start with you. Any comments you want? Please put your answers to the chat in the chat box as before.
Yeah, I guess I would hone in on the sort of answer D here. I think there's a range of approaches across A, B, and C about how closely the CEO is involved in the day-to-day sales activities and kind of where you are in that maturity curve. But ongoing kind of any stage of the business, the sales leadership needs to be directly part of that senior team. It is the voice of the market. It is the kind of representative of your clients, the good and the bad, and what's going on in the marketplace. And the sales leader needs to bring that voice to the CEO, so the CEO has perspective. And salespeople are amazing in that they are in the marketplace every single day, getting that feedback, hearing what's going on with competitors and with buying patterns, and kind of coalescing that anecdotal feedback into something useful that a CEO can make decisions around. So CEO needs to stay engaged in this process across the whole lifespan of their business, and that sales leader needs to be really closely involved.
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous point, and it's hard to really overemphasize this. Whoever is selling for you, if it's including the CEO or it's separate from the CEO or it's only the CEO, there's often too little recognition that you are listening to customers. The business you win, the business you don't win. And if you don't step back from the urgency of closing the deal, you're going to miss a lot of valuable data. Yeah, thank you, James. Caroline, anything you wanted to add to that?
I agree with James on just keeping that seat at the table and keeping that flow of information going. I think one of the most powerful things that somebody can do is be that, just summarize what you're hearing from the marketplace with real data. I think folks get really annoyed when you come with the loudest customers saying they need X, Y, and Z. If you're able to say, here are 7 insurance companies who all need the same thing and it's going to bring in $7 million of revenue, that is a much more powerful conversation, to point D, to help a CEO make decisions to allocate resources. And that is the job, to help that person just be more effective.
That's great. Kara, I'm going to turn to you with actually our question here. How can a young company best establish the functional relationship between sales leadership and the C-suite? And this is really the question I think that matters most. What are the most important elements of ensuring that sales and the CEO are aligned? I think Caroline just gave us a great example. Okay, we can be not just the voice of the customer, but the marketplace. These are the target-rich parts of our marketplace. This is the approach and why they make the decision. But think about that alignment question. How do we do that? Because CEOs often make sales and they don't even know why. How do we make sure that alignment's there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had the benefit of working with lots of different CEOs and also founders. And I do think, particularly for founders, this relationship can be really difficult in some ways and also extremely productive. So difficult in the sense that as this sales leader or salesperson is channeling this market feedback, customer feedback, market fit that Caroline and Tom were just talking about, that is sometimes really difficult to hear, right? So I had a founder once tell me, you're telling me my baby is ugly. I said, well, I'm not telling you your baby is ugly, but I'm telling you we gotta, sort of move the baby around a little bit so that the baby's more attractive, right? And so that can be really, really difficult. And so a CEO or founder really has to think about how they're going to create a constructive relationship where there's a lot of openness and a lot of transparency. I also think that the key to that relationship is early on and really almost in the hiring process. What are the KPIs or metrics that the sales lead or the salesperson and the CEO are going to agree to? Because one thing I think happens is that somebody gets in and then suddenly the CEO says, well, I want this and I want this and I want this. And all of those pressures are there for sure. But I think if you just determine the core set of metrics that you're going to measure together and determine a way that you can discuss the data-backed customer feedback that you're getting, you're going to have a much more productive and healthy relationship between those salespeople or sales managers and the CEO that I think is so critical to that revenue growth.
That sounds like music to my ears. I love this idea of data, not assumption, not anecdote, not whatever. Caroline, I wonder if you have ever witnessed in your work or perhaps seen from afar the situation where the very thing that made a founder, the very thing that made them have the moxie, the idea, the vision, whatever, energy to drive towards founding a company becomes the enemy when that company begins to emerge. And I wonder if you've seen that and how that might have been, any insight you might have on preventing that.
Well, yeah, and what I think has to happen along this journey is for everyone to start to understand their role. At some point when you hire a sales leader and then a team, if you're ever going to scale, that person has to run the sales meeting. And so that amazing CEO who can get into the room and just sell everybody has got to understand that they're going to perhaps bring that person in the right moments, but they have a role to play in that moment. And you've got to let that salesperson run the cycle. And so I have seen CEOs embrace this, and I have seen CEOs who aren't quite ready for it or quite ready to give it over to every salesperson to really run the meeting when that person's better to take it through the full cycle. And so it's getting everybody comfortable with what their role is as this thing starts to scale.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. And to everybody who is participating, I think that kind of wisdom is really important. Check yourself. You may be finding that, it's always, well, I can do better than anyone else, so I have to do everything, is a death knell for any kind of attempt to scale. James, to carry on with that, if you think about an emerging company, a big opportunity. So this is one of those opportunities that happens twice a year. You're really going to go for it. The CEO insists on coming along on the sales calls. Talking about this idea of what is your role and trading on what Caroline talked about, like if you're going to have somebody sell, well, let them sell. How do you do that with a forceful personality of a CEO who comes in thinking, well, yeah, I hired you to sell, but this is far too important to let you try it? Well, what do we do about that?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really classic challenge I've run into many times. I think part of it is that sort of constructive tension in the relationship and being able to positively direct a CEO and be able to say, awesome, really glad you're joining. Here's the role I see you playing. And the role can be really powerful. the storytelling that a founder can tell about why they created the business, their passion, their experience, their credibility in the space, can be game-changing when a buyer is hearing that, particularly if the buyer is of a similar profile to the founder. That's really incredible. It has to be sort of centered in a context and in an agenda, and roles need to be really clear. The guidance I've given to a number of CEOs is, you shouldn't be part of this meeting, or you should play this particular role because it makes the company look bigger. If the CEO is in every single meeting, leading every sales call, it looks like a small company. Fortune 500 companies don't have that. The CEO may get involved in certain deals in important places, but you want to save the CEO for really important elements. And that, I think that plays to ego a little bit of the CEO, and a vision of growth, but it happens to be really, really true. So getting that right is critical, and having the CEO play certain roles, and then the salesperson or the sales leader play other roles in terms of corrective questioning, pushing back, sort of asking, do you think the baby's ugly? How are you perceiving the baby? Asking the questions that a founder might not be able to ask. And you need to have a relationship with your CEO that's your job, and you're not calling the baby ugly. You're just trying to get it into positive lighting.
Got it. That's interesting. I think you're right. I think that the idea of the CEO showing up at every sales meeting does give you the sense of small company. It may also highly decredential the salesperson. We've all had the buy the car, let's go talk to the manager, why didn't we just start there in the first place sort of experience. But I think that's really important. Kara, I wonder about this one, and a lot of times you can read and you can see examples, I think all of us have, where a very valuable role to play in an emerging company, mid-stage growth, is the voice of what I'll say caution. It's a bad word. The returning Roman generals who would march all of their thievery back into Rome, into ancient Rome. Behind them was someone constantly whispering in their ear, you didn't just do this, it's not going to last. And I think this idea of a reality check person in the conversation ongoing with a CEO, is it realistic to expect a sales leader to do that, or is that really more a CFO's job or a COO's job? Any observation to have on that one?
I firmly believe that is the role of all three of those executives that you just mentioned, right? And they're all coming at it from different angles. So the CFO is the reality check on often how much cash do we have on hand, and are we gonna make it for the next 12 to 18 months, right? And they are reality check in a very different way than a sales leader can be, right? So I do think a powerful sales leader or a really powerful first or second hire is going to be saying, these are the obstacles or challenges that are going to prevent us from getting to where you want to be. And that is obviously directly connected to that sort of cash outcome, revenue outcome, right? But it is also about the forward vision that we were talking about before, about how the product and the market are sort of resonating together to create success, and what's going to need to change or what's going to need to be doubled down on in order to win in the way, in the sort of volume or in the growth targets that you have set out for the organization. I also think, by the way, we're talking a lot about the CEO and the sales leader, but I think there's that third stool of the CFO that is really helpful from a expectation setting. How are we really thinking about where we need to go? What's the pacing that we need to achieve? And how are we really writing deals? There's a piece in the chat around don't sell something that you can't execute on, right? So that's also where the finance head or somebody on the finance team can help too. How we execute it and making sure that we continue to create this revenue stream with this customer for a long, long time. So I think those are important things.
Yes, thank you for that. We have a little bit of time left. Before I turn to Tyler to ask about the polling results, I wanted to get a quick take from each of you, and I'll start with you, Caroline, in terms of, having started and exited several companies of my own, I know that the single most frustrating thing I had to deal with day to day were my investors. And they came filled with expectations that, unfortunately, no matter how much I tried, they insisted I promised. But how would the sales leader, if at all, be able to help the CEO against this pressure other than just making lots of sales? What really would be the formula to say, look, I can help you relieve some of this pressure? And I'll go to each of you, but Caroline, if you give me kind of quick insight on that, I appreciate it.
And having been lucky enough to attend some of those board meetings in one early stage startup, what I saw work really well is the trends, right? So maybe we didn't hit this number this quarter, but we figured out this specific product market fit. And here's the trends we're seeing across 5 customers. And here's our plan to get more. So I think it's really helping, like in any sales organization, right, paint the picture of here's where we're going with this success, and here's what we know is not working, and kind of owning that, right? Always get ahead of the objection. We figured this thing is not actually on fire, so we're going to do something different. That to me helps them sell their own story in that meeting, and ideally, you're part of that meeting. I mean, I think it's also really helpful to understand what the investors value and what they're looking to see for the next quarterly meeting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the idea of data, trends, get off the losing cause, ever honing on the winning cause. James, anything you wanted to add to what Caroline offered?
Yeah, just amplify its signal is what the sales leadership team should be bringing to the table. A seed round or VC round investor is buying the future, is buying where things are headed. And what the sales team is, obviously we're there to provide results in the now, but we're signal about the future. What's market receptivity? What do sales cycles look like? What is going to happen? And tell the picture of the future.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Kara, anything on top of what your colleagues offered?
Amplify again, just the piece too around, I think one thing that I've seen is that investors, well, I'll say sometimes CEOs and founders don't think a lot about the competition. I've heard a lot of founders say, my product is completely unique. Right. My tool does something entirely different, but no matter what, customers are going to try to put you in a bucket. Just from a pure psychology perspective, they need to fit you somewhere. What is the bucket that you're getting put in? And one thing that I think is really important that the sales lead can bring to the CEO and investors is really understanding what that bucket is and what's happening in the bucket. So where is the competition going? And this doesn't mean, by the way, that I'm suggesting you need to match feature for feature, or you're sort of saying we can't win because of the competition. But it's again about that trend analysis of what's happening in your bucket and where are the other tools or products that look like you, where are they going and what are they doing, so that you can also make sure that even if you're not successful now, what are the things that need to change to get you ahead and to really put you in a different space in that competition.
Yeah, great offers. One thing I would add, having raised money for the companies that I started, I learned the very, very hard way that I would always talk about this as qualified professional investors. I always say I learned the hard way, don't take money from your dentist. But the idea about is what they want to know is that you have your handle around what's going on, even if the sales numbers aren't where they are. I think Caroline started us there. They want to know that you are evaluative, not panicky and searching for every drop of revenue, that you're building something through analysis, through data. Doesn't mean they're always going to be happy, but they're going to be far happier if they know you have some sense of control and perspective of the global effort, as opposed to just promise to make better sales next time. We're low on time here. Tyler, what were the results? I'll go back to that slide. What were the results of this last poll that we had?
Yeah, so based upon the results from the first poll, where they're not hiring yet and the founders do all the selling, it's no surprise that, again, the overwhelming majority selected option E, where they don't have sales leadership. but there is pressure to grow faster. And then in the distance, third and fourth, it was around the CEO is directly involved with the deals and the salespeople.
Okay, so in the few minutes we have left before Seema returns, I'll go to Kara first. And what would you say to these folks in the overwhelming category of E, we don't have sales leadership yet? What would you, any insight you can give them as to the trigger for when you should begin looking, or when you should say to yourself, yeah, I think it's time for us to get a sales leader here? Any thoughts or insights, experiences you want to share there?
I think it's hard to maybe put a number on that, but I think that one of the critical pieces that you can look for is this question, Tom, that you had said before around how are you thinking about scale? And I think one thing that happens is that, especially if you don't have people surrounding you to go create the outcomes, the CEO is doing too many jobs, the founder's doing too many jobs, right? And so it's very difficult, I think, for that founder then to be able to spend enough time with customers and prospects and also do all the mechanics, talk to investors, you know, all those things that we've been talking about. So I really think that it's important to think about this as one of the critical early hires so that you can really have somebody just focused on that externally facing constant connection with prospects and the market to understand where you need to go from here. That's
fantastic. Thanks. Caroline, I'm curious on this one to piggyback on what Kara just said. I think we'd all agree an early hire is really a good idea. Before you have sales people, it's hard to hire a sales leader. Or is it? Do we hire a sales leader in anticipation of building the force under them? Or does he or she come to us as a salesperson with the expectation of promotion?
Yeah, I've seen it done the former, where you get a salesperson in who's excited to join at the ground level, one or two people after the founder has maybe sold the first 5 clients and starts to run at it, 1 or 2 people, and then you get some momentum. And at that point, the CEO says, okay, we are ready to scale. Let's bring in someone to build out the team and build out the process.
Mm-hmm. Got it. James, anything you wanted to add there?
I do think there are markers that tell you when you're ready for the next phase. And I think I aligned with Caroline. There's really 3 phases. There's the CEO alone, there's the first salesperson or 2, and then there's scale, which is process and building, and places where I think General Assembly and EVERFI are at that sort of like go big stage. And I think it's just recognizing where you are. But that first stage, make sure that you have sort of set up a framework that you can hand to another leader to refine and bring some professionalism to.
Got it. Really a fascinating time together. I wouldn't mind if we could make a closing comment from each of you, and what I would like to ask each of you to do, and I'll start with Kara on this one. Kara, knowing what you know now, if you were starting a company today, what would be the one thing with regard to sales, the single thing you would say you would encourage to be the first in terms of setting yourself on the right course?
I think for me, it's really this customer centricity and really understanding your customer deeply. We talked about a lot of process pieces around that, right? Ideal customer profiles and the market feedback and their journey. I really do think, and I know there have been many books written on this, right? The more you focus on the customer, the more successful your organization is going to be. And really trying to unpack the customer needs and the way that your product's addressing those customer needs, I think is the core to success for me.
Great. James, anything you would add or build?
Yeah, customer centricity is it. It tells you if you have the right product, tells you how to go about it. And then it's like building a process around that customer. What is their psychographics? What's their buying behavior? How are you going to engage them in a constructive way and keep them engaged? It makes sales a lot easier. I mean, this if you're just going out into the market without a clear picture of what your clients are, you're really guessing. It just makes the endeavor, exponentially harder and fraught with peril.
Great. Caroline?
I mean, I agree with James and Kara 100%. The only thing I guess I would add is collect that data in a way that when the next person comes on board, you have 100 conversations that show exactly what the product said. So you can segment, you can help, or the market said, so you can segment that, your product person can do something with it. It's not just living in one person's brain.
Awesome. Well, I guess, you can't get better than these three, and I hope this has been useful to you. From a personal standpoint, as a serial entrepreneur, I can tell you both my vocation and my avocation are devoted to this discipline of what does it take to make for great sales. It is a science. There are lots of things that you can really do to accelerate your growth and establish a terrific team. I hope that the advice these three have given you has been of value. I have absolutely loved getting to know the three of them and clearly learned a lot myself. Seema, have you returned?
I have. Did you see me, Tom?
Yes.
You can hear me? I want to really thank you guys. This was such an incredibly dynamic conversation. I knew going into this, there would be so many nuggets. And for someone who works with visionary founders, I just kept shaking my head. I'm like, exactly, guys, you're absolutely right. I took a lot of notes myself because there's a lot of validation. But Tom, thank you for hosting such an incredible talk. I'm just going to actually say 3 takeaways from each of you. James, like when you say, until the founder has gone through the sales journey themselves, from identifying the client, nurturing the client, conveying, who is the client and what they actually want, and retaining that client, it's so hard to bring on a salesperson and say, just go do it. Because that's when salespeople actually fail, and it's not their fault. It's just product validation is so critical. So it's so important. Caroline, when you talked about understanding the buying process and refining the sales process in that moment, I mean, that is, and then what tools does the buyer need to make that decision? That's that next phase, right? And I think that's so important. It's not just, there's different pieces of the sales funnel. And I think it's important for founders to really understand what those tools look like at every step. And then Kara, I think you said so many things, all of you, but you said the best way for a salesperson to give the CEO and the founder feedback is through data. And that is so critical because especially visionary founders, they just think and it's a good thing. I think resilience of founders is so important too. And we have to really appreciate that going into any, organization and startup. But data is so important for decision making. So, I mean, incredible conversation. So thankful for all of you for being here today. For the attendees, I just wanted to share that we have multiple sessions today for the growth track. Right after this, Scott Casey's the CEO of Upside Business, and he used to be the CIO of Priceline. He's hosting our next founder chat with David Hall. He's a managing partner of the Revolution Fund. You don't want to miss out on that. At around 1 o'clock, we have a growth hacking, Catching Your Dreams for SaaS clients, Aaron Kroll, amazing expert workshop. I'm actually moderating a panel on digital marketing and the role of growth at 2 p.m. We have focusing on the CEO mindset at 3 p.m., very important. A lot of people don't talk about that at growth, but mindset is also very critical in scaling your company. We have optimizing your product development cycles at 4 p.m. And lastly, at 5, we have a whole session on crowdfunding, the alternative ways for raising capital. So with that, thank you all. Thank you for being here. And I look forward to seeing you guys at the next session.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you.